welcome back to Reunited States, the podcast where we bring civil discourse back to our national dialogue. From Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Eric.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And we have taken a bit of a small break last week, if you haven't noticed, but we're back. And we have a lot of news to talk about. Jesse, you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got obviously a lot to talk about here this week, and there has been, as we just keep saying every week, it's like, wow, where do we even start? But for lightning news, one thing I wanted to address first is a Truth Social post that came out yesterday from the President of the United States. He posted, quote, "All federal funding will stop for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protests. Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. No masks. Thank you for your attention to this matter." I love that he ends this with "thank you for your attention to this matter," as if it's like, public service announcement here. By the way, people are going to be jailed, and it's just the craziest thing. Also, what illegal protests are you talking about, Donald? Are you talking about storming the Capitol? That counts as an illegal protest, doesn't it? Oh, wait, yeah. Apparently not in your world. So that's something that is disturbing. Again, I don't know what the policy is. It's very difficult to tell, what is just, again, the smokescreen, what is just, rhetoric that he throws out there. But this is a serious thing to be talking about when we talk about the First Amendment. And, to any people out there, and especially, college students and college campuses, the thing that I would just say to you is, this is meant to frighten you. This is meant to scare you, and if you react with fear, then you are giving him exactly what he wants, because they want to silence you. They want you not to voice your opinion. And he's talking, I'm sure here, about a lot of protests that you and I have been critical of relating to Gaza in the last couple of years. Not necessarily on the substance, but certainly on the strategy side. Again, what I will say is, as Voltaire said, I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And I do believe in the First Amendment. I do believe in free speech. And I think it's one of the great things that separates us even from many of our European allies. It is our First Amendment privileges here in this country, and we have to make sure that those are not infringed upon. So I'm in favor of speech, even if I don't like it, even if I'm critical of what they say. I do believe that they have a right to do it as long as you're doing it peacefully. It does say in the First Amendment, peaceably assemble.
You said that so well, and you're right. This is meant to get you angry. This is meant to get you upset. This is probably meant to instill protest, and that's what he wants. He wants that reaction so he can show the world, or rather the country, just how quote-unquote dangerous, these gatherings can be, right? He loves to, go back to the BLM protests and all these things that happened over on the West Coast and throughout as an example of why, protests are just violent and why they need to send out the National Guard and all these things. But the damage that something like this can cause troubles me, because yes, can they actually do this? Technically no. It would in fact infringe upon your First Amendment right to protest and speak out against your government, right? But the thing is, that First Amendment right only really comes into account after the fact, right? They can send in the National Guard and dissolve any protests he wants, whether it's peaceful, whether it's one person, 100 people, whether it's violent or not. He can do that. And yes, if it is peaceful, if it is in fact an infringement on your rights, you can then sue and very likely win on grounds of First Amendment. But by that point, the damage is already done. He's already done what he wanted to do, which was get rid of the protesters. So that's the concern I have, because people will say, well, he can't do that. Because that's something I heard a lot when people were talking to me about this. is, well, he can't do that. So, like, why do we care? Well, that's not it. He can do it. It's just you can sue him and win afterwards. But is there really a point to that besides getting money at that point in time? He's already silenced you.
Yeah, and it's not even getting money in many cases. It's just keeping yourself out of prison. Yeah, I mean, I would just also remind people that this is not the first time that this has happened in American history. Over 50 years ago, at Kent State University, there was a shooting in which the National Guard fired on protesters and killed 4 students. That was a big deal for those of you who are students of history and American history. That was a gigantic issue that led to mass protests and the May Day March in 1970 against the Vietnam War. But that was the Nixon administration trying to crack down on protests on college campuses. So again, I may disagree with some of the methods and methodology and some of the words that have been used on college campuses relating to Israel-Gaza conflict in recent years. I may disagree, with some of the with some of the lack of strategy, but again, you're also going to hear me go both ways here. I'm going to stand up for your right to protest, and I'm going to encourage people in general to not be afraid to voice how they feel, because the minute we are too afraid to speak how we really feel, they have won. That is exactly what they want.
Mm-hmm. And if you are listening to this and saying, I need to get out there right now, I need to speak my word, yes, do it. But again, do it smart. There are ways in which there are avenues in which you need to go through in order to peacefully and legally, to use Trump's language here, to legally, form a group and actually protest around a public building or in a public space. You can get permitting for it. Please do all that. If you are interested in protesting, or if you're interested in trying to gather people to speak out, do that. But make sure you go through the proper channels. That will be the only protection you can possibly get, especially when Trump is trying to say it's only the illegal ones. Then do it legally. You have to get the permitting. You have to get the right permission from the right individuals in order to gather and protest. So do those things. Go through the right channels to best protect yourself and your own liberties. But absolutely do not stop.
And the best protests, if you look back through history in the United States, have always been strategic. They've always been planned ahead of time. It's not just outrage. The outrage is there, but it is outrage and strategy together. So and that's what we're talking about here. If you're upset about something, by all means be upset, but you have to think and plan ahead in terms of how are we going to protest this and do it effectively. Because people, when you're just running on outrage, which is what many of these kind of recent protests seem to have been doing, you're not as effective. You're not as effective at communicating and winning people over to your side, because that should be the goal. The goal should be to convince people that your cause is a just cause and a right cause, and to win people over onto your side, not just to shun the people who disagree with you.
Look at what we saw in Los Angeles recently with the counter-ICE protests as something that is a great example, because again, all peaceful, large, huge swaths of thousands of individuals, mostly of Hispanic heritage, displaying their heritage in a way that was genuinely peaceful. I was there. I mean, I worked downtown. I saw the protests every single day. I literally worked in the building where they were circling around. Did I ever feel in danger once, me or my coworkers? No, not ever once. I walked right there out front of them. I walked right past them. Perfectly safe, because they knew what they were doing. It was really more of a show of heritage and of culture than anything else, but a very good example of how to do these things effectively in a way that's not going to catch the ire of the right, who wants the violence to ensue. They want that one little example of violence to show up so they can say, see, a bad idea. But look back at that and use that as a great example. Because again, that was a massive, massive, massive movement. But again, very safe, very strategic, very welcoming. It was a fantastic moment for LA history in terms of how to gather and protest your feelings in a way that is legal, but also acceptable. With that, on to our next news here. Trump comes back with his 25% tariff plan for Canada and Mexico after threatening and then rescinding them early last month. We talked about that on a previous episode of the pod. It looks like he's coming back and trying to make it go forward again. But as of quite literally this morning, he has now rescinded it again, saying that they're now in talks with the governments of Canada and Mexico to go back on the 25% tariff plan. It really looks like he's just going back and forth on this plan, doing nothing but angering the governments of our two allies. And again, he's playing with a trade war. You know, we're going to talk about Zelensky in a second, but when he says, you know, you're playing with World War III, my guy, you are playing with a trade war with two of our most important allies in the Americas. This is insane.
Yeah, it's, as I said, I gave him some level of skeptical credit several weeks ago for getting something out of that initial kind of threat of this trade war. I think it's ridiculous, again, to use trade wars this way. You don't treat your allies like this. And when this got announced, we were talking about it, and I said, yeah, I'm not so sure this is going to stand, because I just feel like this is him. Well, I won once. I beat them once. They gave me what I want. We're going to come back. We're going to do it again. This is like his thing. He's just going to bully until he can no longer bully them. So, yeah, I do think that hopefully, this insanity is going to get dropped. He's already dropped or paused the 25% car tariff on the two nations. But, we will see what is going to come out of this, and whether this actually continues, or if he's just going to keep using it as this big stick to try and bully our allies. I wasn't upset about it, for him to do it once to get certain things. Again, I thought it was kind of silly, but I'll give him credit that at least he did get some concessions out of the two nations a month ago. This is pushing it. This is really pushing it, bro. Tariff wars, trade wars don't help anyone. That's what, Justin Trudeau said yesterday. They won't help anyone, and your government is doing this to you. He was speaking to Americans, saying, your government is doing this to you. We don't want this. This shouldn't be happening. So we'll see.
And it makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
It really makes no sense. The first time he instituted this, it seemed like there was a plan of what he specifically wanted to get out of it, and he did get some form of that out of it. But when looking at his language now, all we really know is he wants more. More what? Like, what do you want? Like, because now all you're going to get is retaliation at this point.
Yeah.
And they're fed up with it. They're fed up with it. They're going to retaliate instead of giving you something that benefits the U.S.
He's just a bully. Just a bully. We shall see how this plays out, certainly. But, again, nobody wins in a trade war. So, a measles outbreak in Texas has grown to over 150 cases, 159, I believe, at the last count, roughly 24 hours ago. So, this is the worst outbreak of the measles in over 2 decades. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the architect of the MAHA plan, Make America... MAHA! MAHA! Or as he would say, MAHA! Yes. Bobby Kennedy Jr., who said that this is not abnormal. It is abnormal. This is not normal, Bobby.
Just because you got measles does not mean everyone else can get measles and be fine. Like, that was literally his like defense, and I'm like, my guy, you're giving like the boomer like answer. Like, come on now.
It's crazy. And this would be something that we would just be like, okay, we're going to control this. We're going to go in. But when you have somebody who is a vaccine skeptic running the health of the nation, running the largest health organization in the nation. Uh, Concerning again, like there's so many things that are concerning here, but this is not normal. This is not just something that happens. This is a bad outbreak of the measles, which is a very serious disease, that is also very preventable with vaccines. And it's this looks like it started in a Mennonite community, shock of the century. But yeah, measles on the rise apparently.
Vaccinate your kids, parents. I did mine. Come on. Come on now. Going back to the tariffs for a second, we were talking about the possible retaliation that our neighbors can have in regards to these tariff plans. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, has ordered the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, the LCBO, to remove all American booze from the shelves of LCBO stores across Ontario as a countermeasure against Trump's proposed tariffs. This is mostly going to be your bourbons and your whiskeys, but any other spirits that come from the United States no longer going to be stocking the shelves in Ontario. And this is the kind of countermeasure that we're kind of concerned about. When you start removing products completely, right, and removing them from markets completely, and the retaliation and then counter retaliation to those things is how we get to this trade war. And something we're going to talk about Trump's speech at the joint session of Congress in a second, but one thing Trump said in that speech was that if there were to be non-monetary countermeasures or retaliation from our neighbors as a result of the tariffs, that he would respond in turn with the U.S.'s own non-monetary countermeasures, which means if Canada wants to say, fuck American bourbon, I'm not going to stock it here, he is saying that the U.S. position can likely be that we will retaliate by not accepting Canadian spirits or maybe just Canadian products in general onto U.S. shelves. We would no longer purchase those, or at least create some other extremely heavy roadblock to make that near impossible. And with Mexico in a very similar position, although they have not stated anything about any sort of non-monetary countermeasures in the form of product banning and things like that, you have to stop and think, if that's a possibility, how is that going to snowball? Right? Are we not going to have tequila? Like, what's going to go on here? Right? There's a lot of ways this can snowball.
Forbid.
Oh my Lord! Without Modelo, I don't know how I'd survive.
How are we going to get through these years without it?
I'm going to have to drive a whole 3 hours to get tequila in TJ. But no, really, like how this will snowball can have a massive impact on the economy of all three of these countries. And yes, Jesse, you said it a few weeks ago that this can very much affect the economies of our neighbors more than it can affect our economy because they're so much more reliant on U.S. products and services. But it's not to say it won't affect us at all. And it very much can, not just from an economic perspective, but also lifestyle, right? I mean, there's a lot of people whose jobs rely on certain imported goods. What are they going to do, right? If we have a guy who has a tequila bar in the U.S., well, if they can get tequila, what's going to happen to that bar? It's like there's, and that's a small little silly, example, but there's a lot of things like this where this is more than just like what an inconvenience. I can't get this product. I can't get all dressed chips, all boo-hoo, which does suck. All dressed chips are the greatest thing in the world. But this can affect a lot more than that when you talk about the industries that can be directly, affected by such countermeasures.
I really only have one question about this, which is, so they're taking all this American booze off the shelves. I don't live that far from Ontario. Like, if I drive over, can they, do I get a deal? Like, are they going to resell it? Like, can I just rent a U-Haul, fill it up, and bring it home with me? I just wanted to know if they're not going to drink it. I certainly could use it. So.
Well, I think they are drinking. That's the thing. I think they are, from what I remember correctly, they are going to be selling everything that they have, and that's it. Like what they have is being sold is they're not restocking anything. So people are going and buying their last bottles of Buffalo Trace or Bullet Bourbon or whatever, and but that's it. Like nothing else.
I just wanted to make sure, that this wasn't like a Boston Tea Party thing where, we throw the whiskey into, the like Lake Ontario or something.
I mean, Trump might make you dump, Crown Royal into the bay. I don't know.
Yeah, I won't be doing that anytime soon.
No,
but,
no.
All right. So let's touch on one of our two big topics here today. We get two big topics to talk about. The first one is Zelensky and the Oval Office debacle that we saw last week. I've already addressed this a little bit on social media, but man, there's a lot to talk about. And then we also, in short order, we'll talk about the president's address to Congress last night, for us here recording on Wednesday, last night, and the Democratic response to that, the pros and cons of what happened.
Or lack thereof.
Well, I mean, they responded. We'll talk about that. But yeah, so if you are living under a rock and you haven't seen the clips of what happened last Friday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, as well as Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in the Oval Office. And as is the usual in these Trump era, he left the cameras rolling in the Oval as they talked for almost an hour, and at a certain point in time, the meeting looked like it was going perfectly fine, but at a certain point in time, J.D. Vance decided to get especially hostile and start criticizing the Ukrainians. Now, J.D. Vance has been adamantly anti-Ukraine, anti-supporting Ukraine. He does not like Zelensky. This has been kind of documented now for quite some time. Zelensky responded by essentially providing information about, because Vance was saying, we're trying to talk about diplomacy with Russia. You have to be able to have diplomacy. And Zelensky responded by saying, what type of diplomacy are you talking about, JD? Because we have signed agreements with Russia before that Russia has not honored repeatedly. There have been ceasefire deals that have been signed in the past, and Russia does not honor these agreements. They continue to push forward. This set J.D. Vance off, who said, that it was inappropriate and it was rude, that he was, trying to play this out in front of the American media. Never mind the fact that Trump is the reason the American media was there in the first place in this Oval Office discussion. And then they proceeded, the two of them, to just berate him, treat him very, very disrespectfully, in my estimation. They think that Zelensky was disrespectful. I'm not sure how anyone could watch that and actually really believe that. But yes, J.D. Vance said, have you said thank you one time in this meeting? And again, you don't project strength by then asking people to say thank you. You project strength by doing the right thing. And as I said on social media, I thought that was a basic U.S. value, American value, that we tried to do the right thing. And many times in foreign policy, we clearly have not done the right thing. But in general, we have tried to do the right thing more often than not. And clearly in this situation, we're taking the side of Vladimir Putin over Zelensky. And Zelensky, the message out of this to Europe was, Europe, you are on your own. And that's what I would tell you. You're on your own, Europe. And you should have already known that, but if you needed any more evidence, this meeting was it. So really, really disheartening events that took place. I think it's the most shameful behavior by a sitting president publicly in the Oval Office ever. I say publicly because, we don't know what's going on in the Oval Office dating back to Clinton and and before. Or maybe I guess we do. But this was really disheartening, and I work really hard to push back against this narrative that many people have of, I'm ashamed of my country. Because this to me, that takes away from the great things that the country has accomplished, that we have led the world on, and we have led the world on a lot of things in this country, in the history of it. We should be very proud of aspects of that. But I really was ashamed of my country on Friday, and I continue to be ashamed of the way that this war hero was treated by a draft dodger and a clown. I think back to the early days of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, in which the U.S. offered to get Volodymyr Zelensky out of Kyiv because it looked like the capital city must fall, and his response was, "I need a weapon, not a ride." And that's the type of courage that I wish we had in our Oval Office. But if you think for 1 minute that Donald Trump would be saying that in the same circumstances, you're kidding yourselves, because he is a coward. And he always has been. And this was so absurd to watch these two men gang up on a foreign leader, an ally of ours, and bully him.
Not just two men, because we saw attacks coming from the media as well in that very same room. We had some freaking butthole asking him about a suit, which is completely unrelated.
Let's clarify. This is not journalist is a strong word from him. That is Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend.
Really?
Yes, that is Marjorie Taylor Greene's
well, that explains
boyfriend,
that, doesn't it?
who was let in because, again, no longer is the White House correspondents, no longer is that organization deciding who gets to go in to the briefings. It's now the White House who's deciding, and they're allowing in crazy kind of far-right conservative fringe people, media, and yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, as you said, asked Zelensky, "Why don't you wear a suit? Do you own a suit?" It was so condescending.
Ugh, it was so, first off, out of left field, inappropriate, unrelated, and took all the spotlight in that moment. Now everyone's focused on this again, and that's kind of the theme of this whole meeting almost, is that there's all these attacks, right? There's J.D. Vance asking about, why aren't you thanking the president? You should be thanking the president. You shouldn't be here litigating for the American people, or whatever the language was. Trump saying it's so bad. You keep saying Putin, but you keep saying Putin this, Putin that. But I know Putin's such a great guy. He keeps saying all these things, taking the spotlight away from what that should have been focused on, which was Volodymyr Zelensky's crisis in his country, the invasion that he has been staring at for years now, that he has been looming since 2016, since Crimea was annexed, knowing that it's going to happen, and now it's here, and he's been fighting it, and yet all that meeting was about, Trump and Vance, everyone else in that room, except for maybe Marco Rubio, who was sinking into his into that couch deeper and deeper, but everyone in that room is just making it all about them.
And
right?
In fairness, I think Zelensky could have handled it better. I do, because.
But how do you when you're being attacked like that? When you're being told that the guy who is invading your country is not as bad as you're making him out to be. That if I'm being bullied, right, and I go to the teacher, let's say, right, and I'm saying, hey, this person's bullying me, blah blah blah, I need to help me, and the teacher is telling me, why are you talking all about him? He's a great guy. He's an A student. He's a this or that. He's a whatever. He's on a, I don't know, football team or whatever. And all they're doing is placating the person that you are trying to explain that you are under threat of. How else are you going to respond other than getting upset, right?
No. So here's what I think. Right off the bat, I agree with you on all of this. Again, I don't think Zelensky is at fault for this, but he had a playbook. Because in the 2 days prior to this, or in the week prior to this, you had Emmanuel Macron come to the White House and sit in the Oval Office, similar thing. And then you had Keir Starmer, so that Emmanuel Macron being the president of France and Keir Starmer being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, both of which went the flattery route with Trump, and it worked beautifully for them. And if you look at how ridiculous, this is the crazy thing. Keir Starmer did it the best.
With the key, with the letter from the king and all that.
Yes, the letter from the king. He goes, "This is unprecedented."
He touches him on the shoulder.
Touches him on the shoulder. I mean, yes, it is the most ridiculous, absurd thing, and we all know it. But Trump takes the bait on that because he's such a narcissist, and he, is such an egotistical maniac, and he loves being flattered. And so, if you're Zelensky and you need the United States as badly as you need us to help you in this crisis, I do think that coming in there and playing, Zelensky is infinitely smarter than Donald Trump. He had to know that this was a possibility. But apparently the outfit, his clothing that he wore, pissed off Trump from the start. When he got out of the car, Trump was offended. He was making kind of cheap jokes to the press. Look at him, he really dressed up for this one, didn't he?
I wonder if he says the same thing when Musk comes into the Oval Office wearing a fucking t-shirt.
Exactly.
And a hat.
Yeah, when Musk comes in there looking like, he just finished playing PlayStation for 3 hours on a beanbag. No, I mean, but also the irony of it is you've got them sitting there in the Oval Office, and right next to them is a bust of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill on multiple occasions. When he visited Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he visited heads of state, he met with General Eisenhower at the time. He was in war gear. He was in his military uniform because he was a country at war. This is a country at war. It wasn't like Zelensky showed up in looking like John Fetterman. He showed up wearing his military uniform that he has worn multiple times before. This was not a sign of disrespect. This is a reminder to everyone that he is a country at war. Bombs are being dropped on his nation every single day. His citizens are dying and being killed every single day on his territory from a foreign invader. So yeah, the clothes thing set him off on a bad foot. That's not his fault. But he could have gone in there with something in terms of effusive praise to try and butter up this, egomaniac. Should he have to? Of course not. Does it excuse the fact that Vance and Trump went after him in what seems like a clear setup to me? No. But I don't think Zelensky handled it perfectly, if we're being, just trying to be objective here. I do think he could have handled it a little better. And it certainly, none of this helps, but he was, after this meeting, he was asked to leave the White House by Trump. So they did not sign the minerals agreement that was there, that they were there to sign. This was a disaster, and it played out publicly because Trump wanted the cameras on there, and as he said at the end, this is gonna make great television, of course. And he's not wrong. It did make great television. It was just, seeing a reality show in the White House it doesn't bring me comfort. So
no, and of course there is a lot more at stake here than just publicity stunt, the Hollywood moment, right, where people can just there's a lot of things that Trump does that we can laugh at, especially back in the day. A lot of things we can be like, yeah, whatever. But that's becoming increasingly no longer the case. His actions have more and more weight now than ever before, and his continued attempts to make everything this TV moment, this Hollywood moment for ratings or whatever his intention is having real world disastrous effects on the world order, the current world order. He is destroying partnerships with allies. He is turning the current web of alliances that we have, especially with Europe, on its head. And that's going to be more disastrous than hopefully he knows. I'm hoping he's not doing this fully intentionally of what's going to happen. But, in a way, this kind of goes even beyond that, because what I saw in that meeting, what I saw after that meeting was, and a lot of people have already said this before as well, but just a lot of regurgitation of the Russian talking points. And when you're talking about world leaders meeting with Trump, Putin met with Trump as well, along with, not along with, but like in addition to Macron and Steimer, like Putin met with him too. Putin also placated him in a way that Trump very, very much liked. So much so that he was so quick to adopt all those Russian talking points, all the Kremlin talking points, and not just him, but right wing media also adopting all of those talking points. We saw a lot of like the response in Fox News were all on anti-Ukrainian defense spending. We're all like, hating on Zelensky, whether it was for his outfit, which is ridiculous, but I guess they're used to they're used to criticizing people for their outfits. Sorry, Obama.
Hashtag tan suit.
Yeah, right. But they're also like, Marjorie Taylor Greene was on some of these channels talking about what Putin had said years back, saying like, oh, they're against Christians. Like the reason that, that this is happening is because Putin is fighting against those who are trying to destroy Christianity, and he is fighting for Christianity, and we need to fight with Christianity as well. Marjorie, he's literally fighting Christians. Like, what the fuck are you talking about right now? But again, it's the Kool-Aid. It's the Russian Kool-Aid that they're all drinking, and they're all now just regurgitating this. And the one thing that came out of that meeting was, if you looked at Moscow's response, they loved it. They said it was unprecedented. It was fantastic. They were so happy.
They said historic. And I agree. It was historic. It was a historic disgrace.
It's a very scary thing when Trump's actions are having greater and greater consequences.
Yeah, another thing that I want to finish here with is just that, J.D. Vance, the interesting thing, did acknowledge in that meeting that Ukraine was invaded by Russia, which is odd considering we as a nation voted against the United Nations initiative to several days prior to reassert that Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked. We voted against that. We sided with nations like Russia, North Korea, Iran, etc. So what a shameful thing that we are literally siding with our historic enemies against our allies. It's not like, oh, we've brought other people into the fold. We are just changing sides and deciding.
And they haven't changed either. It's not even like it's a new regime or something.
No, they're worse.
It's not like, they're the same people.
They're worse.
If anything, they're bad.
Russia is
worse.
infinitely worse right now in terms of opposing U.S. values than it has been since the fall of the Soviet Union. It is the worst it has been. And yet we are somehow embracing them and taking Putin's side, and it's disturbing. Just really dark days in American foreign policy right now, and there's no fixing this. This is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with for the rest of our lives, which is that the U.S. has decided to abandon its allies, and they have no business trusting us ever again. If I was a European nation, even if Trump gets kicked out of office in an overwhelming landslide in a couple years, which I don't see to be the case, but they should say the Republicans get kicked out of office, an overwhelming landslide. What would make a European nation think that 4 years from now or 4 years after that, we wouldn't just turn right back around? Like, foreign policy now has become part of our politics that just swings like a pendulum. It goes from one extreme to another extreme, and it's crazy.
Yeah, it didn't used to that way.
It did not.
No. There used to be, while there were always the differences in left and right thinking, domestically speaking, there was still generally, not completely of course, but there was still a general consensus over how to treat foreign affairs. That was in some capacity bipartisan, and the parts that maybe were not bipartisan were not so egregiously different that it caused, a shift in partnership and allies. Usually it was like small things like funding or whatever. But
all right, so we should talk about this speech yesterday that Trump made to the joint session of Congress. It's not technically a State of the Union. Your first speech as president is not a State of the Union because you've only been on the job for a short period of time. It is a speech to a joint session of Congress.
Though it certainly feels like he's been president for a long
It
time.
feels like he's been president for about 40 years just in his second term here. I mean, in terms of the content of the speech, none of this should be surprising. He talked about transgender issues about 40,000 times, it felt like.
Using fake stories, by
Fake
the way. If you
stories.
wanted to go and check those, a lot of the stories that he said about the men and women's sports, which is something I personally have had concerns with in the past. But those stories that he referenced, a lot of them were in fact false,
Yeah.
completely false.
Yeah, again, we've had discussions about this. I think that there are fair talking points relating to this issue regarding sports, that I think we should have those discussions. I think we should be able to have those discussions. It is so crazy that this is dominating so much of their policy. It does say that it is clearly a winning thing. It has helped them immensely politically, but I mean, there are more measles cases in Texas right now than there are transgender athletes in high schools across the entire nation. So, like, let's talk about the actual scale here. But the content was.
But fear is a powerful motivator.
Fear is a very powerful motivator. Trump said that everything is back. It's great. The whole country is great. We've done more in 43 days than most administrations have done in 8 years, is what he said. I mean, that's. You may have done more damage in 43 days.
You did more something, that's
you did
for
more
sure.
something. You fired more people. Okay, good for you. But the Democratic response. 4 minutes into the speech, Representative Al Green of Texas is kicked out of the speech. Like, I've seen posts on social media since this about, is this the most courageous act of civil disobedience I've ever seen? Is this, the most amazing act of protest against tyranny? Come on. Come on. Are you serious? Like, you think this looks good? Because it didn't look good. First of all, why would you give them the satisfaction? He's sitting there chanting and they can't control him. This is where Nancy Pelosi as Speaker would never have let this happen. And I like Hakeem Jeffries, but Nancy Pelosi kept her conference in line, always. And Hakeem Jeffries told them, do not do this shit. Do not go in there and heckle the president or any of this, and you've got a 77-year-old man waving his cane around. Just another reminder that we have the Democratic Party is this party of old people who, and he's waving his cane like he's yelling, get out of my front yard, and then he gets ushered out. He has to get escorted out, and you get the chants from the joyful Republicans chanting USA, USA into na 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 na, hey hey hey, goodbye, which again, that's ridiculous. Like, this is, why would you give them the moment where you look like the rowdy people? Yes, Trump is saying crazy things about cutting Medicaid, and Al Green, the representative, said, he doesn't have a mandate. I was trying to say that he does not have a mandate, and I agree with that. He doesn't have a mandate, but you can't be ushered out of, he's going to be censured. Like, now the thing that people are talking about is not Trump's speech, which could have, or Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan's response, which I thought was a very strong response. But they're talking about this crazy, angry Democrat getting ushered out. They're talking about the stupid signs that Democrats were carrying. Anything from "this is not normal" to shirt. It just lies. You have to look like a unified conference if you want people to trust you, and Republicans have always been quite good at this. We criticized Republicans a decade ago for the representative from South Carolina who shouted, "You lie," at the president. It's over a decade ago, during the State of the Union. It was a totally disrespectful thing to do, should never have done it. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some sort of protest of Trump, but if you were going to do it, it needed to be a unanimous, unified front. You can't have, it looks like Democratic leadership has no control over its party right now. And, you saw Chuck Schumer, Mr. We Will Win.
Our favorite man.
Our favorite man, Chuck. The invitation is still out. Come on to the podcast here. Defend yourself if you can, if you have the breath support. Yeah, Chuck Schumer out this morning trying to clean it up. He would not defend it because he didn't want his members of the Senate doing this. I just think that, again, the outrage politics, this is not a good look for the Democratic Party. Trump came out of last night looking better than the Democrats did, looking stronger, looking more in control. Democrats look fractured, and just like kind of every man for themselves. What did you think, Tyler? I'm curious.
No, everything you said was definitely spot on. What I found interesting was, as soon as Al Green was removed, all the boos stopped. If you notice at that point, like they were booing, there was a lot of like that coming from the Democratic side. And then once Al Green did his whole stint, they were quiet as a mouse for the entire rest of the 2 hours of grueling talking that happened, which I thought that was particularly interesting. It's kind of reflective of what, when we talk about Trump talking about the college protesting and removing people, that's kind of like the thing that concerns me. Not to say that Al Green was in the right to be doing so, but the idea is that once you have the ability to silence one person, you do that, everyone else falls in line real quickly. In fact, all I really heard the entire rest of that speech was the chanting USA, Trump, 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 and Trump giving placations to all these like random people and victims of violence and all that stuff, which is fine, I guess. But that was another concern I had. And again, I know a number of weeks ago I went deep into the immigration piece and Trump's whole anti-immigration stance. That was something that he did talk about quite a bit during this speech, which was, again, very concerning to me. Not surprising, because it's always been Trump's position. But again, like, it's been this Republican talking point to use these very few instances of very unfortunate circumstances, very unfortunate violent deaths that has occurred at the hands of some, migrant individual, and saying, look, that's why every single one of these people needs to get out. That's why I need to make the gangs in Mexico and from Venezuela, at the same level of terrorist category as ISIS, which makes no freaking sense. ISIS wants to destroy America. That's why they're a terrorist. Their whole existence is to destroy our country and other Western countries as well. That's their life goal. The life goal of a gang in Venezuela is not to destroy America. They do not care about that. They're a gang. They're just doing their own thing. Like, is that thing good? No, absolutely not. Gangs are terrible. But to say that a gang just kind of doing their own thing is somehow at the same level of terrorism as ISIS makes no sense to me, and is clearly just another play to rile up the anti-immigration crowd, to give himself more ability to go harder on this anti-migrant policy. And that's deeply concerning to me. Like, when I saw him say that, I was like, he wants to use these very few unfortunate circumstances to get people against an entire group of individuals who, many of which are seeking asylum for reasons outside of just wanting to come to the country. Some are doing it legally. He's mentioning Springfield again as one of these communities that were, that they were inundated with migrants, and in his words, turn into like these terrible places. Again, those migrants that went there were legal migrants. So, like, what are you talking about here? It seems like you're just anti-migrant. And that's kind of like, that's the takeaway from this, is that Trump is anti-migrant. He is not anti-immigration. He is not anti-illegal immigration. He is not specifically anti, migrant crime or whatever. He is anti-migrant. He wants to get rid of migrants. And it has never been just about undocumenteds, people who have crossed the border illegally, people who have just committed crimes. It's never been about just those individuals. He uses those as a scapegoat, but then when you look at his language, he is actually using them as an example of all migrants everywhere.
Specifically black and brown migrants.
Absolutely. And never has that been clearer than the way he concisely said it at this joint session of Congress. Again, it disgusts me as a child of immigrants. It disgusts me to no end. And I've spoken countless hours to people who feel the same. And, is there much we can do about it? No, he's going to say what he wants to say. He's going to do what he wants to do. He's Trump. He's the president. But, man, it infuriates me. It makes my blood boil hearing that kind of rhetoric and knowing how he is using these stories as a weapon. Not as I'm so sorry about your kid or whatever. I'm naming a nature reserve after them, whatever. Okay, fine. There's nothing wrong with that, But that's not the point. The point wasn't to do all that mushy-gushy stuff.
It's never the point.
The point was to use it as a weapon against, like you said, very specifically, black and brown migrants. Legal, illegal, who cares?
Look, if you come from any country that he would refer to as a shithole country, that's pretty much, the countries that he has referenced as why don't we have more immigrants coming from are places like Sweden and Norway, first of all, places where people don't want to come here because they're very happy where they are. The places that he considers to be shithole countries are, places where black and brown people come from. This is a continuing trend, but it's very clear that the goal is kick out as many of those people as possible to preserve white and specifically white male superiority in the country.
Right, and and he talks about his stupid gold card, which I don't even want to talk about the fucking gold card. It's so dumb, but it is another clear example of what he wants, and that's all you got to get out of this. Is what are his intentions? Well, there you go. He's blaming sanctuary cities, blaming Los Angeles for having harbored these quote unquote dangerous criminals that had done these unfortunate crimes and all these things, right? These murders, but. Again, it's all because he needs something to blame.
Joke.
And now he's blaming U.S. cities for doing it. It's something. It's horrendous. It's horrendous, and I wouldn't put it past him if he said, what, give Mexico back California, and I'll take Greenland instead. Or something stupid like that.
Look, you can't put much past him at this point in time. Most things could be on the table. The Greenland thing, he seemed to be enjoying his nice little comment about that, whether they want to or not, that kind of, you're going to be part of our nation or we're going to take it from you. What a ridiculous thing. And honestly, if we buy Greenland, will he go up there and live there? That would be a nice trade-off. I'll support that. I'll support it if he moves to Greenland. He can even call it Trumpland. That's fine. Call it Trumpland. That's fine. I don't care. Just stay there.
I thought that's what he's going to call Gaza when he refurbishes it.
Oh, yes. That's the Trump strip. Yes. No. Anyway. All right. So, it's a lot to have talked about here. But on to our favorite segment, things we should all agree on. So I'm going to start here today. There are things that we should all be able to agree on, and yet somehow we find ways to make even the most straightforward realities into battlegrounds. And I want to take the recent firing of Joy Reid from MSNBC and talk about kind of the response to it. So Joy Reid is undoubtedly a talented journalist. She's an intelligent commentator and somebody that I truly have respected in the past. Though I will admit my views on her have evolved some as we go, and I'll talk about that. But, her departure from the network should spark a conversation about media ratings, about the changing landscape of cable news. It should talk about, like, is MSNBC trying to pivot more towards the center? Those are all fair discussions. But instead, it largely became something else entirely. And so Rachel Maddow went on to her program, and again, Rachel Maddow, a journalist that I admire, and I think is probably the most intellectually intelligent person on cable news right now. But she came on to her program and honorably tried to defend her very good friend Joy Reid. And I get that. I respect that. But then she made an implication, or an outright suggestion, rather, that Reid's firing was potentially racially motivated. And this bothers me. On multiple fronts, this bothers me. Because here's the reality. Joy Reid's ratings have dropped. That's not conjecture, that's not spin, that's data. And MSNBC, a network that is still very much invested in amplifying diverse voices, is replacing her with a panel of not just one, not just two, but 3 commentators, all of whom are people of color, 2 of which are women. 2 of which are women. And this is not just a, tokenism thing. These are people who earned this job because they have their own current show on weekends, and they increased the previous time slot's ratings by 35%. This isn't the case of silencing a black woman. This is a case of a television network having to make a decision based on numbers, as they always have and always will, whether we like it or not. Now, let's talk about why Reid's ratings fell off. And this is where I am going to speculate, because I watched the readout. I follow Joy Reid on social media. I've shared her posts throughout, both on the podcast as well as my own personal page. Again, I admire her intelligence and insight. But somewhere along the way, in the past few years, she has become almost insufferably biased. And not just leaning one way, that's expected, but diving headfirst into the same brand of outrage politics that Fox News thrives on. And that kind of broadcast might get clicks on Twitter, it might get interest on social media, but it doesn't work on cable news. Not at least on the left. The people who crave outrage are either A, Republicans who watch Fox News or OAN, certainly not watching MSNBC, or B, young progressives who don't watch cable news at all and get their media and their information, their news from social media. There is no market for outrage politics on the far left on cable news. So let's talk about the journalism for a second relating to Joy Reid. A month ago or so, I talked about Joy Reid posting a factually incorrect claim about Senator John Fetterman on her Instagram page. It is still there. It's patently false. It's wrong. It's easily disproven. But it fits her narrative, so she has let it stay there. That's not journalism. That's agenda pushing. And that is beneath someone of her experience, intellect, and journalistic integrity. That's why I have moved from Joy Reid, because it does feel like the only guests she brings are people who reiterate her opinion. With that being said, here's what I do believe. MSNBC should have found a way to keep Joy Reid, or they certainly should have tried to. But let's be honest, if you've watched her show, was she ever going to accept a lesser time slot? I'm highly skeptical of that. And so we're here. She's moving on to a new network. Another group of anchors are coming into her time slot. And instead of facing the real reasons for this decision, instead of acknowledging the shifts in audience demand and journalistic responsibility, we're being told to see racism where it doesn't exist. And that's harmful. That's dangerous, because racism is real. And it's real in network television as it is in our society, and it's pervasive. It's embedded in our society in ways that demand to be acknowledged and fought against. But when we start crying racism every time any black person faces professional consequences, especially when you can justify those consequences with numbers and data, we dilute the meaning of the word. We make it harder for non-white people to identify and call out the real racism that exists every single day. This should have been a discussion about media. It should have been a discussion about ratings and integrity. And instead it's become another manufactured outrage cycle, and that's something that we should all be able to agree is a problem. And what we also should be able to agree on is that things are so much better now than they were 4 years ago in terms of the major networks promoting voices of color. If you look at when Joy Reid took over, she was the first woman of color in primetime television on a major network. Look at CNN now. Abby Phillip has the top-ranked show on CNN. Each night, Laura Coates is on CNN. Simone Sanders is one of the three people taking Joy Reid's spot. It's hard to sit here and say that if you look at the numbers, that somehow this is oppressing people of color and that she's being fired because she's a woman of color. We have to look at this objectively. And again, the outrage and claiming racism on everything, making insinuations like that, is irresponsible. And it hurts the cause that we're working towards, which is trying to make a more just and more equal society. Do we need more people of color and their voices on cable news and on media in general? Yes, we do. We need them. This is not an example of silencing that. That doesn't mean that you have to keep Joy Reid in a position that she has, frankly, lost on her own accord. That's what I got for you.
That's well said, and all I'll say is sometimes business is just business. Sometimes there's not much more to it than that. You know, stop reading into everything so critically and wasting so many of your resources in doing that. You know, like when you're criticizing your own, you talked about eating your own a number of weeks ago, and I'm actually going to be talking about something very similar. It's funny you mentioned this. This is just an example of eating your own. You know, it's like you're focusing on these like small things, trying to find some some criticism to have, right? Some sort of controversy. But sometimes there is no controversy. Sometimes it's just business. Sometimes it's just the way things have to roll out. You know, we don't know what happens behind closed doors in MSNBC or any other company. You know, that there could have been many reasons why this action was taken. We don't know, and you insinuating that you do know or thinking that you know and trying to make extrapolations based on that is not helpful. All it does is smear our own party's name, right? All it does is make it like easier for the other side to attack, right? And we weaken our own base by doing that. So I'm going to go into my things we should hopefully all agree on very similarly. And I'm going to touch upon the Oscars real quick, which happened over the weekend. I'm a huge movie guy, as most of you who watch this probably know that. You, of course, know that too. You're also a big movie guy. But I want to talk about one specific moment in the Oscars that caught quite a bit of traction on social media for, in my opinion, all the wrong reasons. And that was the win for Best Documentary Film. The Best Documentary Film winner for the Oscars this year was a film called No Other Land. And it was a joint production by a Palestinian and Israeli guy that was made to highlight the horrors that are happening in Gaza right now. It's a beautiful documentary. It shows a lot of harrowing detail in regards to that crisis. Great film. And when the individuals were called up They gave a very, very great speech, in my opinion. I thought it was a very, very well made speech about coming together. It felt like, compared to a lot of other people who tend to use their platform, especially in the Oscars and the Grammys and stuff like that, to say something political, this didn't really come out as preachy, like a lot of them tend to be. It felt very genuine. I thought it wasn't preachy. It was very much like, guys, can't we just get along, et cetera, et cetera, stop the war, stop the dying, all that stuff. It's great. It was great. I was very happy when I saw that segment, until I took to the internet to see how people were reacting to this win. And what I saw, especially from a lot of folks on the left who are very passionate about the Gaza crisis, was two things, both of which I felt are very, very silly. One, were a bunch of people criticizing. So before I go into that, the two individuals that spoke were Bassel Adra, a Palestinian journalist, and Yuval Abraham, who was an Israeli journalist. And again, both had great parts of their speech. But on the internet, all of a sudden, I'm seeing a bunch of folks talking about how, when Yuval was speaking, because he was Israeli, that makes him like a fake supporter of Gaza, that he's not genuine in what he meant with his commentary about wanting to end the war, simply because of where he came from. That can't possibly be true. And this goes back to a lot of like the anti-Semitic stuff that we saw in the beginning of this crisis, where people were attacking folks of Israeli heritage, saying, well, this is your fault or whatever. It's like, you clearly have to support this because you're Israeli, because you're Jewish or whatever. Like, again, it's a lot of that anti-Semitism that I saw coming up again when people were discussing the nomination and the win of this documentary film during the Oscars. And I'm like, what about him made you think that, other than his nationality? Because there is nothing that he said, whether at the Oscars or outside the Oscars, to my understanding, that could have possibly led anyone to believe that he is somehow not genuine in wanting to end a crisis that he was very much involved in. And you just think, oh, because he's Israeli, that means that he wasn't genuine in what he meant? That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. That is ridiculous. It's baseless. And to take a bit from your things we should all agree on, it's you're finding like racial things where there isn't any. And I don't understand like why. But that's only one side of it, because the other side of things, which I thought was equally as ridiculous, was I saw a ton of people on social media platforms talking about how, because every single person did not stand when this film was announced as the winner, that they clearly do not stand with Gaza because they didn't stand up to clap. And they were making lists. There were people making lists of everyone who was not standing, that was within purview of the cameras, saying, look, all these people didn't stand, therefore all these people are anti-Gaza, pro-Israel, pro-genocide, pro-ethnic cleansing, whatever. And I'm like, guys, what the actual fuck are you talking about right now? This is insane. First off, most people don't stand when there's a winner. Like, that's normal. That's a normal thing not to do. And second of all, are you seriously insinuating that because someone doesn't want to stand up, that means that they have some sort of very specific, opinion on a war on the other side of the world? Like, is that really what you're taking from this? From an award ceremony in Hollywood? That's what you're getting from that. So much so that you are trying to make blacklists of people, saying that, oh, now we have to ban all that person's movies. Can't watch that person's movies. That person clearly, supports Netanyahu. Okay, what? Are you serious right now? Come on now. That is insanely ridiculous. So insanely ridiculous, but it also, unfortunately, doesn't really surprise me. When you look at a lot of like these super, super vocal folks on the far left, when talking about the Gaza crisis, a lot of them are so quick to villainize people who did not jump into their far left camp in regards to the crisis, that all they were successful in doing is splintering the base, splintering the opinion on this crisis. It could have been as easy as, yes, we all are against, war, and we want to end war, and we want to stop this conflict. But instead you made it so that unless they were thinking the way you did, unless they were anti-Israel because of the nature of the war, that means that they are a villain, that they are evil, that they clearly are pro-genocide and all these things. All it does is splinter us further. And again, when you look at the election, when you look at the results of the election, it was present there. It was a big reason why there was a splinter in support for Kamala, for Biden. And it's unfortunate to see it still here. We didn't learn our lesson in coming together on this issue when there is a president in office who clearly exemplifies everything that you thought everyone else that wasn't you was. There's a president who quite literally exemplifies that to a T. And yet you are still picking fights with movie stars? I mean, come on now. You're still picking fights with your own party when, I thought now that we would have a common person to to be able to corral against in regards to the crisis, that this would be over. But apparently not. Apparently we can't help ourselves. We have to be well, you know what, John Lithgow, that guy didn't stand, so clearly he really wants genocide. Now, come on now. That's just, it's insane. And for the record, I think John Lithgow actually did stand. He was the first name that came to my head.
Well, you know what John Lithgow didn't stand for. He did not stand for the composer of Emilia Perez and the off-key singing that took place. I would not have stood for that either. I just have to say, that person, they beat Elton John. This is crazy. It's actually insane. But anyway, no, you make a fantastic point overall about all of this. These purity tests, this idea of if you're not 100% with me, you are against me, are killing the Democratic Party. They are killing progressive movements. We're eating our own. And if you look back through history, this is what has happened to progressive movements. They have always done this. They've always kind of consumed themselves because, someone is not as progressive as someone else, but they agree on 95% of the stuff. That's not enough. John Fetterman votes with you 92% of the time. That's not enough. And it's exhausting. And so, yeah, when you watch something like that at the Oscars, a moment that should have been something really powerful in terms of bringing together these two groups of people. They've just won an Oscar for telling the story about the horrors. We should all be able to condemn, the violence that has taken place. And instead, you've got people using it as an excuse to target people is ridiculous. And you hit the nail on the head with that. All right. Well, that's our show for this week. Thank you all so much for listening. Of course, continue to follow us on Instagram as well, at Reunited States Pod. Continue to, talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, engage in respectful dialogue. I know it's hard. It's really difficult sometimes. But these are important conversations that we're going to continue to have. With that being said, from Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And this has been another episode of Reunited States. Until next week. When the whole world has got you down, and there's no one else around, turn that frown right upside